Hello, I'm George Middleton. Welcome to Deconstructing Race, a critical thought podcast where we deconstruct race and its social issues like this.
A country emerging from protests of pain. After the killing of George Floyd,
I cannot breathe.
Viral moments of racial bias caught on tape.
I'm going to tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life.
And the deadly shooting of Ahmaud Arbery.
Race, a social construct of chaos, resulting in learned behaviors that can be unlearned by challenging our system of beliefs. Let's begin. Welcome to Deconstructing Race, where we take topical issues and deconstruct the racial thought process behind them. I will continue with part 4 of the polygamy of ideologies next week. For this episode, I would like to share with you my recent experience as a guest host on my colleague's radio show, Dr. Lauren Harden's Medically Speaking. It airs weekly on WTLC AM 13 every Saturday at 10 a.m. The topic is the George Floyd Aftermath. Have we learned our lesson? Check it out.
The following is a paid program. The views and opinions expressed are those of the sponsor and do not necessarily reflect the views of Radio 1, WTLC AM 1310, 92.7 FM, 95.1 FM, The Light, and its management.
This is Dr. Virginia Kane, Director of the Marion County Public Health Department. We are proud to sponsor Medically Speaking. The Marion County Public Health Department is dedicated to serving you and the needs of our community. So stay tuned right here for information and your comments and questions on Medically Speaking.
Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to Medically Speaking. I'm George Middleton, your resident mental health therapist. And you should know that your medical condition is determined by your mental condition. So I'm able to have the fortunate experience of substituting for Dr. Lauren Harden. And so I'm not going to sound anything like her. I'm not as beautiful as she is, nor as talented. So I'll just try to do what I do. And hopefully we can have a great conversation this morning. So to bring me to the topic of the discussion today, May 25th, 2020 is the date of the awakening of the tragic incident of the George Floyd nationally televised murder. And so the question today that I'm presenting for discussion is, have we learned our lesson? A little over a year later, the George Floyd police reform bill has failed in Congress. So that really is an eye-opening set of events, because you would think that everyone would be able to agree on something that capitalized the world and awakened everybody's emotions about what's going on with systems and race. And so that's the question for discussion today, is have we learned our lesson? As a mental health therapist, when this happened, I received a lot of calls. Part of my work is I am a diversity consultant. I'm promoting a platform which connects the quality of our mental health and the impact of race ideology on that. So I'm addressing race as it pertains to our mental health. And there were so many corporations and organizations that were who are familiar with my work, they called me and were desperate, trying to figure out how do we address this. This was just right after the heat of the George Floyd murder. People were really, really looking for a way to effectively be a part of the solution. And what I found is that many organizations doubled down on practices that have not worked. And we're still now, a little over a year later, we're still having the same issues that the protests and Black Lives Matter have brought a lot of attention to. On top of that, there is another report that has surfaced that demonstrates that we have that the system of law enforcement nationally has undercounted the number of deaths by police. So the statistics that we thought we were operating with were not accurate, and that the problem is much larger than we realized. And so again, here we are a year later, a little over a year later, and since George Floyd, we've had additional questionable murders or shootings by police of the racial demographic Black community. So again, I want to have this discussion. Have we learned our lesson a year later? Have things improved? Do we have solutions? What's working? Or are we repeating the definition of insanity? Towards the end of this discussion, I really want to try to present you with a different way of looking at the problem. As I said, our medical condition is largely determined by our mental condition. And where this is related in terms of our medical and mental health is a specific term called learned helplessness. And it's an actual clinical term. And learned helplessness, to put it in layman's terms, it's the experience of trying to solve something or trying to achieve something and never succeeding, never achieving it. It's as every time, have you ever experienced that yourself, where every time you try to do something, it just doesn't work? Every time you try to fix something, it just doesn't work. Every time you try to do something that you've never done before, but you really want to do it, and you've done it over and over and over, and it just never works. Or a particular problem, economic or physical, mental, that you try to overcome. And no matter what you do to fix that issue, it ultimately ends up in failure. Eventually, what happens to the human condition is you're mentally resigned to that failure, to the point where you accept the fact that your conditions no longer are under your control, that you can only respond and react to what's happening to you. You don't have the ability to influence your environment. And this condition, learned helplessness, you can see it in examples like the zoo, animal trainers, where they teach animals to be limited so that they don't break the boundaries that are imposed upon them. The most striking example of that is how the elephant is trained. They'll start baby elephants out on a chain and a stake in the ground. Now, when it's a baby, it can't break that chain, but because as it gets bigger, elephants can cause mass destruction. They can tear down trees. But at birth, their mindsets are limited by that chain and that stake. And so as they get larger, the trainer doesn't put a larger chain or a larger stake to the appropriate size of the elephant. It's the same size. But the elephant doesn't know that it can break that chain. And there's a lot of parallels between that experience and the experience of our community from a Black racial demographic. So a lot of my work is really based on how do we think? There's racial thinking and there's cultural thinking. There's a question that I like to ask when I'm doing my work in addressing race and mental health. And this is a question for only your self-reflection. There's no right or wrong answer, only what's authentic to you. And the question is, are you your color or are you your culture? And that question, every time I ask that question in a workshop environment, really gets some very interesting and varied reactions because each person's thinking about who they are is uniquely different. But most people never really consciously separated the difference between color and culture. There's racial thinking and there's cultural thinking. And one of the primary issues that's affecting this issue with law enforcement as it pertains to our community is it's a racial problem, and they're using racial thinking to try to fix a racial problem. You can't get there from here. Racial thinking only gets racial outcomes. When we try to take an ideology that is based in division and make it do something other than divide, that's when the cognitive dissonance comes in, and that's when you start to experience this clinical definition, clinical term of learned helplessness. Because if you look at it from the abolishment of slavery to the tearing down of Jim Crow to the advent of civil rights, affirmative action, it seems as if we're still experiencing the same racial disparities, racial tensions, and racial outcomes of unfairness, inequity in treatment on a systemic level. So how do we do that? We have to challenge ourselves to get outside, to think outside of the racial box. And that is a process, and that's a process that I teach. So are you your color or are you your culture? Here's what I find a lot that happens, is that when I'm doing workshops, those in the racially black demographic will desperately cling to their label of color. And those who are in the racially white demographic will say they're anything but a color. And it's a very interesting dynamic for a lot of reasons. It looks like we have a caller, correct? Naomi.
Good morning, Mr. Middleton or Dr. Middleton?
Just Mr. Middleton, George Middleton, thank you.
Mr. George Middleton. You laid out a lot there to unpack. I do appreciate the platform, and the thing about it is you use the term something to do with mental defeat.
Learned helplessness.
Learned helplessness. Well, I have, it's a clinical term you stated. However, I don't think that is the issue with us as a race of people. I think that because we're coming up against an institution that was put in place and had a long time to figure it out how to keep a person subjugated and divided. That is what we are coming up against, that when we do attempt to come together, it's not long before other issues camouflage in our face, and it takes our attention off of the focus that we had attempted, like the Black Lives Matter. You see how it has dwindled down, and you're not hearing as much about it after the George Floyd incident. However, the homicide rate has gone up 39%. That's the highest rate that I have heard across the country, with only 17% of black people in America. We've been the most affected out of that group of people. And so whenever we get together and start to work in some sort of homogenous way, we soon lose our focus as though we have attention deficit disorder, and that we cannot keep our feet to the fire, and then we begin to bicker from within and not want to collaborate and just go along with one strand of whatever the focus is at a time, and begin to dwindle down and beat down some of these issues that are affecting our people. So that is, I feel like, the problem. It's not that we are give me that term again, sir.
Well, what you just described is actually a criteria of that clinical condition. Everything you just stated that we tend to do.
Give it to me again.
Learned helplessness.
Learned helplessness.
Yes, everything that you just stated that we tend to do when we try to come together, and
that's us doing that. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
That's us doing that. We don't want to work together alone, or we'll fight. like the Black Lives Matter group, as soon as some of the other entities decide to adopt the term, then those women decided that's not what we meant when we said Black Lives Matter, and we don't want your participation in it. I mean, all kinds of fire rockets went off when different.
Well, let me read.
Wanted to yoke up.
Let me read the definition, the specific definition of learned helplessness. And I know you think we're saying something different, but if you really stop and think about it, we're saying the exact same thing. Learned helplessness, a condition in which a person suffers from a sense of powerlessness, arising from a traumatic event or persistent failure to succeed. It is thought to be one of the underlying causes of depression. So people respond differently. They respond.
Is it in the DSM book?
Yes, you can find it there. You can find it. Yeah, there's a lot of history behind this disorder.
I don't think it's so much that we feel helpless, sir. I feel like we just want to try to do it on our own, and we are more powerful together. And that if we would pull our resources together and stay in the fight together, we can accomplish much more than what we're doing. Because right now it does look like we're defeated. It also looks like that the plan is working, a failure by design. The institution that we came into, it was already built and put in place. We're just following up.
And
because you know the other people are not being affected like we are.
And listen to what
black men being.
And listen to what you're saying
every night.
And listen to what you just said. That's strictly right under the condition, the criteria of the condition, the system that we were brought into.
Well, that should be.
Hold on. Take a breath a minute.
Okay.
Just listen for a minute. The system that we were brought into, that speaks to someone else having influence instead of us. So I'm not discounting what you're saying. It's very true what you're saying, but we are actually saying the same thing. I want you to.
What's the remedy?
I'm going. That's exactly it. This is what I plan on getting into. But I respect your view there. I want you just to consider what I'm saying. We have another call.
I consider what you're saying. Yes,
yeah, we have another caller coming in, and I hope you stay tuned because I'm going to propose what I believe the remedy is. Okay, but I really appreciate your perspective. Okay, we've got Mayhem. All right.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, good morning.
Pretty good. Had a very deep conversation. Your dissertation reminded me of Black Naptown.
Okay, now. Okay.
They put them in a square extended box, teach them non-solutions, and they grow up, and boom, they only know 38th Street, and they talk and don't listen. A person that don't listen, I find that you really can't help because they know all the situations. I mean, they think they know all the solutions, then when you give them real solutions, they resist. That's why I don't waste my time no more. What you're talking about is very deep. We got to help people that want to listen, that want to get out of this condition, because the condition is breaking down. It's a very hot topic that you got that we can climb up and break from it. We can. This is our time to rise and take over, but we don't because we are too comfortable. Especially in Black Naptown, we are too comfortable. We don't want to run anything. And we got more blacks in high positions, but they're not bringing nobody up. So we got to break this paradigm because it's good to be the first black in things, but are you going to continue to enrich the system? This system got to be broke, but we don't want to do it. But I find, especially here in Naptown, we got more blacks in high positions. And why is the regular blacks in the city not getting anywhere? So, we talk about white supremacy. What about black supremacy? Thanks. Have a good one. Okay.
Very, very heavy stuff. Mayhem is dropped on there. Just go ahead and drop that mic, Mayhem, and walk away. I want to address that, some of the points in your response, Mayhem, just on the other side of this break. welcome back, welcome back. Before I get into Mayhem's comments and take the next caller, I just want to read a little bit on the failure of the recent police reform bill. Congress is set to miss President Joe Biden's Tuesday deadline to pass a police reform bill as negotiators decide how far the federal government should go to root out law enforcement misconduct and violence against Black Americans. Tuesday will mark 1 year since 46-year-old Black man George Floyd died after former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin pressed his knee onto Floyd's neck for more than 9 minutes. While worldwide calls for justice and a reimagining of law enforcement sparked reforms or budget cuts in some cities and states in the last year, Congress has yet to exert its power to change American policing. Bipartisan negotiators have worked for weeks to tweak the House-passed George Floyd Justice in Policing Act to win enough Republican support to get it through the Senate. A provision to curb qualified immunity, which shields police officers from most civil lawsuits, poses the biggest remaining obstacle toward reaching a deal. So it's just interesting, again, how we have an awareness on a national level of a problem that's been plaguing our community in particular since the inception of America. If you check your history, you should know where the concept of policing comes from. It comes from the first type of policing set after the emancipation of the slaves, which were called slave patrols. But I'm not going to go down that line. But I encourage you to do some research if you're not aware of the history of how policing in America began. So, to address Mayhem's points, he had two points he brought up. First, he started out by saying he has no energy anymore for people who don't listen. And while I understand his frustration there, as a mental health therapist, I never give up on my client. And the work I'm doing right now, I consider, this is going to sound maybe a little mania, but I consider the country my client right now, because we are all having listening problems as it pertains to us discussing issues, problems, and solutions with each other. So it is frustrating, but there are ways to get through people. And one thing I want you to understand is just because someone doesn't agree with you right off the bat or doesn't resonate with you right off the bat, doesn't mean they didn't hear what you said. So it's just a matter of your delivery. The less confrontational you can make the conversation, the more chance that this person that you're having a conversation with will at least consider what you're saying. But once you get into these polarized positions, you're going to lose that. And in order to do that, you have to be able to be in control of yourself emotionally, because, especially when talking about emotional issues. Because that's something that makes you vulnerable. If a person can tell that you're challenging them, and they're going to want to get you off of your game. And if I can get in your head and get you emotionally frustrated, then that allows me an escape route so that I don't have to really deal with my own mess. The second question, which is really important, why do we have so many blacks in positions and yet no change? So both of these points, again, fall under the criteria of learned helplessness, because none of these questions, none of these points are one of self-empowerment, where you feel like, okay, here's what I know that I can do, and here's my plan, right? And when I say this is not a disparaging meant in any type of criticism or disparaging way. I'm just trying to get us to be aware of where we're talking from. Sometimes we talk from positions of empowerment, but mostly, especially when dealing with black, we're talking from positions of unempowerment, okay? And the answer to that question, why do we have so many blacks, quote unquote, in positions of power yet no change, is because if you understand what race ideology is an ideology of white supremacy. And white supremacy not in the way of, big, bad, mean old whitey. That's not how I mean that. Meaning that there is a hierarchy, that those of you who are the lightest on the skin tone chart get the most access to opportunity and wealth. Those of you who are darkest on the skin chart get the least access. So white is supreme on that chart. So everything first goes to white, and then it's distributed proportionally by your skin tone. And there are a plethora of studies that in any area that you want to choose, but just take income, you'll see a direct correlation between skin tone and income. But as we keep talking, I'm going to get into that question of why are blacks in so many of these positions of power yet no change. And the driving factor is when you're thinking racial, you're going to get racial outcomes. So that no matter what you do, if you're thinking in a racial perspective, black is always going to be on the bottom of the outcomes if it's anything positive, no matter how you do it. And you can really be meaning well, have a lot of initial behind your name, have a lot of public acceptance and be in positions of influence. But if you're thinking racially, you're going to get racial outcomes. We have another caller, William. Let's take him.
How you doing today?
Good morning, brother.
It's the thing about a mental attitude, and when you start to think about racism, you're dealing with a mental problem and from the get-go.
Correct.
The man is judging you from the color of your skin.
Correct.
And we perpetrate that whole notion by the little slogans that we be catching forward.
Mm.
If you're yellow, you're mellow. If you're black, get back,
Right.
If you're white, you're all right.
Right.
And we've been going through that ever since I was a kid, and I am almost 80 years old right now. And just like the illustration that you made when you first came on there about the elephant and the rope, only thing that the elephant had to do was lift his leg up and go wherever he wanted to.
Right.
But he had been so indoctrinated by not being able to pull that rope up out of the ground when he was young, that he is still accepting that policy. And the word acceptance, we'll never get anywhere anytime unless we forget about accepting the policies of the races. And we don't begin to discard that particular stereotype that people have placed upon us, acceptance. We have accepted that as a rule. And the white man ain't going to let you do that. We got to get together and form not our rules, but just a way of life, a way of accomplishing things. And we cannot do that without the unity. People's coming together.
Love it. Love it. Thank you, William. You made some good points, and I'm going to address those after we listen to our next caller, Jim.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, brother.
I've got a question for you, sir.
Yes, sir.
When George Floyd got killed, we protested. We burned down almost 2 cities.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But yet, on an annual basis, we have aborted more than 60 million blacks, and there's nobody out there protesting that. The abortion industry was designed to get rid of the black race. Margaret Singer's thesis, okay?
Okay.
When are we going to get rid of, stop killing babies in the womb, black babies?
Okay, so what you're saying is connected with much of what the previous callers are addressing in their own way. So even that question that you asked comes from a position of lack of empowerment. We're asking a question rather than stating a solution. And in order to get the right answer, you have to ask the right question. I know you've heard that before. And we're asking all of the wrong questions. We're asking the wrong questions because our base of knowledge is misinformed. So the first level in order to get to an effective solution is our basic knowledge of what race actually is. Because as you said, Jim, You quoted the author who made the assertion that abortion was designed to specifically root out the black community. When you look at things from a racial issue, as I said previous, you're going to get racial outcomes. But here's the irony. Race is a social construct. Social construct is nothing more than a handful of people who get together and agree that this is going to be this based on no scientific, genetic, or objective fact or knowledge. It's just that we agree to do this. Now, a social construct in and of itself is not inherently negative. Money is a social construct, so we've all agreed that this piece of paper with green ink on it and dye is what we're going to use for our economic exchange. We've agreed, but you can make anything money if you think about it. That's a social construct. Well, that's what race is. Some people in Europe got together because they were trying to figure out how to make some wealthy moves, some money moves, and they found this continent that had a lot of rich resources. So how do we get those resources at no cost? How do we get free labor? I know what. Let's create this ideology that says if you look this way, you're not as cognitively able to control your conditions. But if you look this way, that means you're further up the mental, intellectual chart and should be in charge. And that has stuck because it benefited a certain group for economic reasons. So you have to understand that when you say black people or white people, you're talking a fictional concept because there is no such thing. White and black is an identity that was ascribed to us by the European for the initial purposes of the justification of the transatlantic slave trade. And even though slavery has been abolished, the same outcomes economically delineated by race are still occurring as if slavery was still in existence. All you gotta do is look at the statistics in any systemic area. We've got Charles.
Yeah, this is Brother Charles.
Hi,
Can
Charles.
you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you're a mental health doctor?
I'm a mental health therapist.
You're a black man?
Okay.
I don't mean, I'm sorry, brother.
That's a good question.
Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong, okay?
Okay, go ahead.
But I've been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, right?
Okay.
And I have a chemical imbalance, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I never encountered a mental health doctor like you.
How so?
That talks like you.
How so? Why would you describe the way that I'm talking?
Because you have a lot of truth about the truth about it.
Okay.
And this is amazing. But I just want to say this, brother, that you're right. But I'm not a racist person, so I want to ask you about something you said.
Okay.
If you think racist, then you get racist.
Exactly. Yes.
But I never think racist on people. I think of people as fellow human beings.
Man, great statement.
All colors, right?
Mm-hmm.
But look like to me, I'm just going to say this, brother.
Okay.
What Farrakhan teaches that if you live long enough, you'll learn that what he's saying is true. I never believe in Farrakhan's teaching. I believe in Jesus Christ, the Son of God. I like them, Muhammad. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
I like the prophet.
Right.
But I understand a deeper. I won't get too much into that right now.
Mm-hmm.
But what I like to say this is that I don't think racist, brother, about people, but it always ends up turning out like that.
It ends up that way. So let me while I got you, let me just give you a quick terminology definition piece, okay? because many of us don't consciously think that we're thinking in racial or racist terms. But here's the operational definitions that I'm operating by when we have these discussions. First of all, race is an ideology. Race is not genetic or scientific. It is an ideology. And it's an ideology of white supremacy, meaning that white is on top of the food chart and black is on the bottom. A racist is one who practices that ideology. So just like you can be a scientist is one who practices the art or the discipline of science. A biologist is one who practices the tactics of biology. A racist is one who practices the ideology of white supremacy, of race. And you don't necessarily have to be intentional when you do that. That begins with taking on the label of racial identity, black or white. Those are fake labels that the European created, okay? Once you internalize either of those identities, you are then perpetuating the race ideology. And then lastly, racism is the systemic ability to impose oppression over a certain group of people based on that ideology. So that's the terms I'm working from. So you say that you are not practicing or thinking racial, and I believe you. But you ask me, you're a black man? Now what I'm going to say make you all think that I've lost my mind, but believe me, I'm in full presence of my mind. Since I started doing this work and I learned that the European created these labels, not for my benefit, I have rejected any European invented version of who he tried to categorize me in. Because I understand that neither of those labels, black or white, are beneficial. And there are a lot of studies in the mental health profession that show the mental health consequences on both sides of the racial coin. The mental health issues associated with the black identity and the mental health issues associated with the white identity. And I may need to come back on another show to address that. So we have another caller, but we've got to take a break, and then we'll be right back. Thank you very much. That is the conclusion of part 1 of this program and topic. Check back next week for part 2. As always, I'm George Middleton. Thank you for listening. You can find my racial deconstruction work on Amazon. In addition, I am available for personal consult. Please continue to support this program as together we continue to deconstruct race.